Right now, somewhere in the world, two people of the same sex are getting married. Somewhere else, a couple like them is being arrested for it. The gap between those two realities feels like a distinctly modern argument. But here's the question almost nobody asks. Is it actually modern? Or have humans been having this exact same disagreement for thousands of years? The honest answer is more complicated and more interesting than most people expect. This isn't the story of ancient humans discovering something new. Same-sex attraction isn't a discovery at all. It shows up throughout the entire historical and biological record, in every era, on every continent. The real story is about what different societies chose to do with it. And that story swings from open acceptance to strict rules to outright violence, sometimes within the exact same civilization, just a few centuries apart. Let's get into it. If you want to understand how flexible ancient attitudes really were, you don't start with a simple yes or no. You start with ancient Greece, because Greece alone breaks the myth of a single ancient answer. For a long time, popular history painted ancient Greece as something like a gay utopia, a place where same-sex love was fully celebrated with no judgment at all. The truth is more layered than that. Same-sex relationships between men were common in parts of ancient Greek society, but they existed inside a strict, age-based structure, typically between an older man and a younger man not yet fully grown. This wasn't a free relationship between equals. It came with real social rules about status and about who held power in the relationship. At the same time, Greek attitudes toward full adult male relationships were far more mixed. Some city-states saw very little stigma. Others, including Athens, had real social tension around the idea of a grown, free citizen taking a submissive role, even while accepting the same relationships in other contexts. So even inside one civilization, in one general time period, attitudes weren't uniform. They varied by city, by class, by age, and by who exactly was involved. Which tells us something important right away. Ancient acceptance was never simple. It was conditional, shaped by power, status, and social roles, not by anything resembling our modern idea of orientation. Rome pushes this even further. Roman attitudes toward sex, in general, weren't organized around gender the way modern attitudes are. Instead, they were organized around power. What mattered to Romans wasn't really who your partner was. It was whether you were the dominant partner or the submissive one. A free-born Roman man having a relationship with another man carried little shame as long as he held the dominant role. Being on the submissive end, especially as a free-born citizen, was where the real social judgment landed. Roman emperors, Nero, Hadrian, and others, openly had male partners, in some cases formal, long-term relationships, without it threatening their power. But this openness had a hard limit. Roman acceptance wasn't rooted in equality. It was rooted in hierarchy, and hierarchy always needs someone underneath it. Then, starting in the 3rd century, that openness began closing fast. Restrictions on male prostitution appeared. Bans on same-sex marriage followed. And once Christianity became the empire's official religion, the shift became severe, culminating in the introduction of the death penalty for homosexual acts under Constantine and continued under later emperors. In other words, the empire didn't slowly evolve away from acceptance. It had real acceptance, tied to a very specific set of conditions, and then lost nearly all of it within a few generations, once religious and political power realigned. If Greece and Rome show us conditional acceptance, cultures on the other side of the world show us something different. Acceptance built into gender itself. Long before European contact, many indigenous cultures across North America recognized more than 2 genders. In some communities, individuals who took on roles blending traditionally male and female responsibilities held respected, sometimes sacred, positions in their societies. Today, this is often referred to using the modern umbrella term two-spirit, though it's worth being clear that this term was created in 1990, and not every indigenous culture uses it or experiences gender the same way. Research has identified well over 100 pre-colonial Native American communities that recognized some form of a third gender. In many of these cultures, this wasn't tolerance in the sense of simply being allowed to exist. These individuals often held specific ceremonial, spiritual, or social roles, meaning their place in the community was built in, not just permitted. This is a genuinely different model from Greece or Rome. It's not acceptable under the right conditions. It's closer to, this is simply one of the ways a person can exist. And then European colonization arrived and targeted these traditions directly. Missionaries, government policy, and forced assimilation programs specifically singled out gender-variant roles for suppression, sometimes violently. Many of these traditions were pushed underground for generations. Some are only now being publicly reclaimed by Indigenous communities themselves. Which raises an uncomfortable question: how much of what we assume about traditional values actually comes from ancient tradition at all? And how much of it came from a much more recent colonial rewrite? Here's what all three of these examples point toward, together. There's no single ancient position on this at all. Not more accepting or less accepting than today. Just wildly different systems, built for wildly different reasons. Some ancient societies restricted same-sex relationships around age and status. Others restricted it around power and dominance. Others didn't restrict it in the way we'd expect at all, because their entire framework for gender didn't match the one European colonization eventually spread across most of the modern world. That last point matters more than it might seem. A huge amount of what many cultures now consider traditional, or how it's always been, isn't actually ancient. In several regions, today's stricter attitudes trace back not to deep tradition, but to colonial-era laws, many of which were written by European empires and imposed on cultures that had previously handled this very differently. So when people ask whether ancient humans were more accepting than us, the honest answer is, some were, some weren't. And the ones who were often got interrupted by force, not by their own values changing on their own. So where does that leave the original question? Not with a clean answer. Ancient Greece shows us conditional tolerance shaped by age and status. Ancient Rome shows us tolerance shaped by power, followed by a sudden, violent reversal once religion and politics changed hands. Indigenous cultures across North America show us something closer to built-in acceptance, until it was forcibly erased by colonization. Same-sex attraction itself isn't new, isn't modern, and wasn't discovered at any single point in history. What changes, over and over, isn't whether it exists. It's whether the people in power at the time decide to make room for it or not. We still don't have a single global answer today, any more than the ancient world did. But maybe that's the most honest takeaway of all. This was never really a question about human nature. It's always been a question about power, who gets to decide what's acceptable, and who gets left out of that decision. If you want the deep dive into how ancient humans first found religion, check out the earlier video. And if there's a mystery or origin story you want covered next, drop it in the comments. Thanks for watching.